Yeah, folks. I very much enjoyed talking to David.
Yeah,
Very fun guy. Very yeah.
I love his thing with the ostrich farms. Do you know about that?
I didn't actually.
So like the ostrich, I mean, I don't know maybe what he's referencing, but I know like in the late '90s, early 2000s, there was like ostrich eggs in particular were like a big thing. Everyone was like, these things are legit and it's fancy. It meant a lot to be eating an ostrich egg omelet. And yeah, I'm sure this is not unique to Texas, but all these people started getting them on their farms, all these ranchers, because you were making a lot of money selling the eggs, and everybody was really into it. I
This is
remember
like
as a kid
tulip. This is like
going
the
to,
tulip thing.
yeah, I'm pretty much classic thing.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, of course, as you know, eventually, like people were like, "Why the fuck are you eating these weird ass things?" And people stopped buying them. But the funniest thing is people just let them go here, like ostriches and like emus, right? Because they were worthless to them. Um,
No, of course, but that's horrible.
and
Jesus
so like there's
Christ.
just these wild birds. I mean, there's not too many of them. I mean, it's 2021 now, so it's been enough time for a lot of them to die out, unfortunately. But yeah, they were just like sort of, every once in a while people would like encounter like an emu or an ostrich in the wild here in
That's
Texas.
unbelievable. I mean, well, that's you. I remember at the start of this whole pandemic thing was really popular on Netflix. Tiger King.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, talk about the grim side of like capitalist enterprise in the animal field. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, yeah. No, things get hot for a little while, and then people, yeah, trend ends.
It's like, John Taffert's like, yeah, the bar was really good when it was brand new and people were checking it out, and then shut off, and then all of a sudden I got these fucking lions or tigers I need to feed every day, so I'm going to like every butcher in fucking town getting their scraps. Yeah. So I have been reading Adam Tooze's new book on the COVID pandemic. We had him on Majority Report.
Yeah, I got it right here too. I've been enjoying it. People
It's
should snag it.
it's very, very, he's very great at contextualizing, comparative governance, which is, I think, the best way to look at, how the world responds to a pandemic. Shocking. And he talks about the CARES Act and kind of the brief sort of, because we didn't have an infrastructure for welfare in this country, we just threw cash at people. And how that was sort of radical and very good. And now we have the story here. And let me stop sharing. Yeah, here we go. From Bloomberg. Employers are baffled. I always like this, like scientists are baffled. Like the classic headline: "Employers are baffled as U.S. benefits end and jobs go begging." Now, before David gets into the sort of economic nuts and bolts of what we're seeing here, I actually know somebody who is going back to work because these benefits ended and they're forced to because of anxiety about income. So even if it did work, this is still a vampiric look. Like, this is a look at the fundamental coercion in capitalism, and it's brutal. And this person is going back to school. And I will also say, you talk about, for instance, Amazon talking about the fight for 15 and Whole Foods and Jeff Bezos. He loves to get that $15 minimum wage. Not more than that, even in downtown Brooklyn. That's just a little birdie told me. They'll give you 15, but no more. Not even if you have another job, say, that you can leverage and you don't even need to take it. They like, so this thing about begging for like workers, right? I call bullshit on it. But anyway, it makes me. I'm gonna let David go off in a second here, but it infuriates me, and especially in the context of getting messages like a lot of student or former students are about student loans, gonna have to repay that in a few months. This is the whip cracking, basically the global whip that Joe Biden controls, and he's choosing to let it whip people back into work. And this whether it does or does not bring people back to work, I don't think it's really going to change anyone's mind about it, because this is what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, and I'm trying to think of the best way to start, because let me just start with the $15 an hour thing, just like as a kind of side note. That's one thing that is sort of frustrating to me, because it's like $15 an hour is like the minimum, right? What we mean by that is like not just like the minimum wage, right? But like what you mean by the minimum wage is like this is like the least amount of money that people can make an hour that we will accept as like a legal threshold in this country. Anything other than that is illegal and coercion. So it's just like, it's so sickening when you see companies be like, oh, look, we're paying people $15 an hour as if we're supposed to be, patting them on the back. I mean, that's basically what we're saying is like, that is the very bottom spectrum of wages in this country that we will accept, right? Anything other than that will be illegal because it's immoral to pay anybody that.
Yeah. It's immoral to waste somebody's time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, so $15 an hour is just not enough to get by. And I think like, I don't know, that's a whole other conversation, but I think sometimes, we can get wrapped up in those fights sometimes as socialists where people think that like $15 an hour is necessarily like a good wage, right? Which is not anywhere, not alone, let alone New York City. But if you could bring that piece up real quick, Matt, because there's a couple of notes I wanted to make and then just sort of like introduce the puzzle and then maybe sort of add like a macro Marxist analysis as to why this is going on. So this piece goes, employers are baffled as U.S. benefits end and jobs go begging, right? Because the assumption is that if you got rid of the, these payments to folks, that everybody would be going back to work. If you go down like maybe just like 2 or 3 paragraphs, let me see. So they're talking about how this person who does analysis is missing folks. They're not showing up even though they've raised their wages for a temporary job, by the way. Which I think sort of shows the problem with these things. If you go down, look, I think it's the next little bit here. Across the country, staffing firms and businesses have yet to see a market uptick in employees. Goldman Sachs Group Incorporated economists forecasted the expiration of the federal program this month, which affected about half of U.S. states after the rest ended benefits early, would add 1.3 million people to payrolls by year end. Other analysts said an end to the federal program should increase labor supply. We go down just right out under that. This is the quote here. That's the real nasty aspect of it. We're only going to see the impact of the federal UI benefits ending a couple of months from now. I don't think we're going to see a big spike one way or the other, really, said Anna Elizabeth Conkle, and economists at Indeed Incorporated. We thought things should be better by Labor Day, and they're not. And that's good for there. Let's be very clear what they mean by that timeline. They are saying that people will lose any kind of savings that they have, and that people will be motivated quite literally in that situation by hunger. Right. I mean, this is as basic as Matt was saying earlier of cracking the whip as you could imagine. Same with
the eviction stuff, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, and on top of it, the evictions, no doubt about it. And this is the thing about this particular moment that is so frustrating. These payments politically have been immensely popular. In fact, most Americans support them. I oftentimes when people ask me about the Texas elections in 2020, I remind them that folks here were very, very pro payments. And in fact, some of the people who voted for Donald Trump over Joe Biden, including Hispanics and Black folk in the state of Texas, did so because they found the unemployment benefits and the stimulus payments that they got to be mighty helpful in getting by in this, hellscape that we're all living in. And that's the fact. Why is this a threat to the Biden administration? It's because what it has ended up creating is an ability for some working people to be able to say no to absurd situations, to be able to say no to temporary work, right? Work where they're not going to, there's no promise of a future, certainly no benefits or anything like that. People saying no to jobs that are just absurd. I know the people listening to this show know, as well as the next person, what working life in America is like. It's fucking sucks. And it doesn't matter really what industry you are in. The state of work in this country is abysmal. We have seen decades and decades and decades of erosion of just basic workers' rights. We talk all the time about how some of the labor fights that we're seeing today are labor fights that were fought 100 years ago. I'm just basically trying to reset the board to what it used to be. And the money that some folks have had over this past year has not nobody's sitting fat on the land. You know what I mean? Like nobody's sitting in luxury, but it has meant that kind of constant state of anxiety that you have as a working person has been alleviated, and the ability to say no to things has been something that is much more prevalent for American workers, something that has been missing for an extremely long time. Pull up this quick. I have these charts to sort of break down why this is sort of insane on like an economic standpoint, though. And I'll give you guys a spoiler alert as to why they're doing it. It's to break the confidence of labor. But let's look at to why this is so insane. If you pull this Jackman piece really quickly,
Oh, yeah.
I just want to give Matt Brunegg credit for this figure, and then we can go to the EPI stuff. Matt Brunegg, I think, this is just smart calculus. This is like, working class warfare kind of analysis here. He says 35 million Americans are losing unemployment today. And this was earlier this month on September 6th. And basically the way that Matt Brunegg calculates this is the way that it's experienced by most folks. So instead of it necessarily being the people who directly lost unemployment benefits, it was calculating the households that were losing unemployment benefits. And as I know most of y'all, myself included, I know Matt, we live in multi-person households where other people work. Somebody loses income, that is a pretty significant blow to the community itself, right? To the household itself. That means someone else is having to pick up more groceries, all these other kind of things, right? So this way of calculating this, I think, is truthful, right? It's not just like a rhetorical trick. It's actually saying, what is the effect of this on a lot of people? And the point is that if you scroll down a little bit, it'll show exactly where. And I'd be curious what you have to say here, but he's noting here that it's a lot bigger than this $9.2 million number that 9.2 million people that they were citing. And in fact, around 35 million people, 10% of the United States population, live in households that are scheduled to lose unemployment income.
I'm one of those.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're all being hit by it, like across the board.
It's just like, it reminds me of the Two's book, which is like, that was nice. It was like, because on top of, at the start of this pandemic, to see somebody you're close to be forced by a company to get on the train when you don't know what the fuck this is, right? You don't know what's safe. You're told this is what, like, complete novel virus, and your boss says, okay, we hear that stuff about the coronavirus, but still come to work, like past like the fucking NBA shutdown at this point, all this stuff still come out only to like put you on furlough or whatever the fuck later, like a few weeks later. And then, that was horrible enough. On top, like, at least there was the unemployment like benefits for the people that were in the formal economy enough to have that work out for them.
Yeah. And on top of that, so many people are outside of that economy.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's an important point to make. And this was a massively effective program. It was massively popular. And the thing that's so annoying about it is it was also very beneficial to the U.S. economy, right? Like, Matt and I have been critics of the way that the federal government has handled the pandemic. Not only like under Biden now, where they're trying to cut back these things, but the moment CARES came out, I remember with Michael doing coverage of why this was completely inefficient at delivering for us. And what the primary goal there was always to maintain the consumer economy that is the engine of American capitalism today, right? So let's just let that be known right here, but let's criticize it within its own terms, right? Within its own grammar, within its own worldview. These kind of cuts are so damaging to the U.S. economy, and it's sort of perplexing sometimes that any kind of manager of capital would be doing this. Though later we will show exactly why, because sometimes capitalists and the people who manage capital, which is in this case the United States government, right? The people who are looking out for this is the way to think about it, y'all. The people who look out, they don't take orders from the capitalists. They don't, sometimes they do, right? But more often than not, they are coming up to the big corporations and they're saying, we're doing this because it'll benefit you in this way down the line, right? They look out for the long-term stability and success of this system, right? Individual corporations might have, particular interests that sometimes are in contradiction with this, and there's a conflict. But the role of the state in maintaining capitalism is to ensure the long-term stability of the system, and that's why they come out worse. But I don't mean to bury the lead here. If we pull up this first slide, I want to just note this because it's pretty wild. This is from the Economic Policy Institute. If you do the text first, we'll do the graphic second. This is a study, and you can read this piece. It's in the Economic Policy Institute's website. It's in their blog titled All Pain, No Gain. And they are highlighting this study. The study found on the loss of unemployment benefits. The study found the benefit losses following these early terminations led to only the smallest boost in job finding. So what they're doing in this study, just to be clear to folks, is they were looking at states that cut the benefits early, right? Places like Texas, to see what the effect was on employment. Because if you remember earlier, we were talking about how the economists cited in that CNBC piece were saying like, oh, we'll see this in December, right? This is looking at what the net effect of this was. The study found the benefit losses following these early terminations led to only the smallest boost in job finding. Earnings from work rose by only $14 per unemployment insurance recipient per week in states that cut off benefits. But weekly UI income fell by $278 for an average weekly net loss of $264 per recipient. Because of lower total incomes, UI recipients spent $145 less weekly. On an annualized basis, the average person losing UI saw their annual income drop by $13,728, leading to an annual spending reduction of $7,450. Now, to make people this really clear, what they're talking about here is people are losing this income, the income that they use to go and buy groceries, to get their car fixed, to fill it up with gas, right? All of these things that make the economy move, make the economy hum, right? Like this whole system is a drag, don't get me wrong, but like the fact is that people going out and spending their money is how we all have money in our pocket at the end of the day, right? Economic spending is sort of allows these things to work as a multiplier effect, that it allows more and more economic activity to happen. That's why it's beneficial to the economy, because that creates more jobs, more opportunity, and a larger flow of money and goods and services is better for folks, right? This is why working class people are much more beneficial to the U.S. economy when they have money in their pocket than rich people. Because I know everybody listening to this show right now, if you had $250 more in your pocket right now, there are some things that you would like to be able to take care of, right? Be it debts or be it, maybe getting a little bit more food in your refrigerator, et cetera, right? All of those things allow that money to be distributed around the population, right? When rich people have money, they just put it away, or they bury it in some kind of speculative asset, right? When we get money, we use it typically to pay each other to do stuff for one another. That's why this kind of thing is hitting us so bad. And just while we're still on this thing, if you don't mind putting up that second slide, because This is just a graphic that really highlights what this is going to mean on a macro level. So this is again from the EPI. Unemployment benefit cuts will significantly reduce income and consumer spending. Annualized income and spending losses due to unemployment insurance recipients losing benefits in June, July, or September 2021. And you can see it right there. This is the income loss, what's hitting all of those folks. And this is the money, the spending loss, $79.2 billion. Money that people are not, again, using to buy food in their community, to get their car fixed, right, to pay folks. Instead, that money is just evaporating. So at a moment right now where we're talking about how there's this worry about entering into an economic crisis or an employment crisis, all this kind of thing. What is the solution that the government is putting forward? Well, let's just take a shitload of money out of the economy. Like take a shitload of money out of the consumer economy. It's insane, like even on their own metrics. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah. And I mean, this is just the normal operating procedure of capitalism to affect 35 million families. Think of the way people throw numbers around, when indicting communism. And this is just like a thing nobody really even bats an eye at. This is just like what we have to do. We have to deprive people until they get back into the labor force for probably a lower wage than they exited with, maybe.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is discipline in its pure sense. And I highly suggest, I can't go over it. Maybe this could be something we could do in the future, but The Making of Global Capitalism, a book by Sam Gindin and Leo Panitch, is really influential on me. And it's something that y'all should check out. I mean, it's a book, right? It can be a little bit dense, but they're fun enough writers, and they're talking about important stuff that sort of goes through the history of capitalism. And one thing that's really notable is the willingness of some of these groups, capitalists, right, to take particular hits as long as it means that labor is not militant. That's particularly what happens in the 70s, right? Is that the kind of early kind of social democracy, whatever you want to call it, in the U.S., that led to the growth in the unions, that led to a higher standard of living with working class people, right? Meaning a kind of similar dynamic, right? It was much more robust then, but a kind of similar dynamic where people had a couple bucks in their bank account, maybe owned a home or something like that they were more willing to say no. And of course they were unionized, right? And what did capital do? I mean, that's the beginning of not the beginning, but it's a major turning point in our era, is the breaking of labor across the board. And they did that, one, through the quite direct ones of like breaking strikes, right? The breaking of the air traffic controller strike, and through the Federal Reserve. And if you could just pull this last bit up, Matt, it's the piece. So I sent it to you in the email.
Oh, yeah. 1 second.
Sorry, y'all. It's the CNBC Federal Reserve.
Gotcha.
I just want to highlight this because this is one of those things you have to understand about modern capitalism, that there's just completely different rules. As Matt was saying earlier with Adam Tooze, and Richard Wolff will make the same point too, is like they didn't really know what to do because so much of the U.S., whenever the United States intervenes in the markets, or right, in the economy directly, it's basically to pump up asset prices. And I just wanted to juxtapose the destruction, the walking away and pulling all that money out of the unemployment benefits, right, and sucking that money out of the economy, versus what's going on for asset holders and the wealth. Monday was a big day. Monday, there was a lot of drops in the market, primarily because of fears out of China, but also because people were worried that the Federal Reserve was going to start to slow down its activities. If you just scroll down here, let me read the title. This is the difference, right? So we're talking about unemployment benefits going away for us, but what's the Federal Reserve doing for those who have a lot of money and power in the society? Federal Reserve holds interest rates steady, says tapering of bond buying coming soon. The Fed benchmark interest rates anchored near zero. We've been living in that era for a long time. Maybe check out some of my old gems to look at the finance issue. Officials indicated they expect to begin reducing monthly asset purchases soon, but did not say when. People could check out the article on their own later if they would like to. But basically what this is saying is that while the Federal Reserve has an intention of sort of pulling back on some of these programs, these emergency programs, they're going to maintain them for a while. And just for folks who have sort of missed what's going on, because I know this is like something that doesn't touch your life in the most direct way because we don't own stocks, right? Basically what the Federal Reserve has done is, prepared itself to, for example, do things like buy corporate debt, to involve itself directly in the bond market, to basically buy up assets when needed, to make sure that a certain price is held. And what that means, if you're a speculator, right, which is what people who buy stocks are, it means that, well, you have confidence, at least in the short term, that these things aren't going to go bad on you. So why not buy some stock in, as we were talking about earlier, the Long Island blockchain company, right? Or like any of these kind of funkier things, because there's a kind of, not that everybody wins, right? There are losers, don't get me wrong. Not that every stock is just going up necessarily, but there's a lot more security than honestly, than most free marketeers would tell you, right? People who say like, be smart, invest, right? The game's a lot more rigged than it typically is, and that's because the maintenance of asset prices is a key metric for the Federal Reserve, and by extension also the Biden administration and the federal government. And it's important to just note the difference in how the pandemic might apparently be over for all of us, even though more people are sick, hospitalized, and dying than ever before. We're all being forced back into work. We're losing our unemployment benefits. Oh, but the programs that basically are making sure that the largest transfer of wealth that we've seen in our lifetime, which is a phrase we use constantly, but we saw another massive one in the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's sort of like those like weather events where it's like this is a once in every 500-year flood.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's becoming every year now, right?
Yeah.
Or now every couple months. We're just seeing these schemes that are benefiting the super wealthy and the elite in the society. And I don't know. I mean, it's very clear that there's two different worlds. And it's all. I don't want to sit here and sound like I have too much, like a shitload of sympathy for the Federal Reserve. But it's like, what else are they going to do? Because they know that they can't crash this stuff right now either, because that would be disastrous across the board, right? The financial system starts to fall in the middle of all this. It's disastrous, right? But you see the difference in the kid gloves for capital versus workers because, as I was saying earlier, the state has a different relationship with these two groups, right? They're looking out for the long-term profits of the people at the very top, and they want to make sure that all of us schlubs get back to fucking work and stop complaining and take what we get, right? And that's the two realities that we have. And there's no like this is why the moment like now we have to sort of zoom out of just trying to understand them at their own logic, because the game's very simple. We have a system that benefits a few folks. We have a government that is set up with the goal essentially of maintaining those profits in the long run. Not every single capitalist, but the vast majority of them for sure. Making sure that there's stability in the dollar, making sure that there's stability in profit, making sure that there is possibility of capital accumulation. Right, that's the functional aspect of the government. And there was a period of time when they felt it was beneficial to make sure that workers were getting a little bit of that money and make sure that the entire thing didn't collapse. But it's becoming very clear that they're seeing the end of the utility of that. And that's when we all get forced back to work. This is why you can't wait on reformers or people like Joe Biden to get us out of these kind of crises, because they'll create new ones. And this is literally what this unemployment situation is a created crisis.
And what's funny is like, it's happening even though elaborating a justification for it is actually pretty difficult to do in the media, as we saw with John Taffer of Bar Rescue fame, because John Taffer apologized for his wording, but he should be apologizing for what he was saying about how you need to use like coercion to get people to labor in this country, and the brutality of that. It wasn't the metaphor really. People like you could like that. It was that you were so out with your chest in defense of the dynamic that you were defining with that metaphor.
Exactly. No, I mean the coercion is so true, and I think someone like Taffer would understand that because like that's how he makes his bread and butter.
Taffer, who got $100,000 or so of
people who don't know, it's the bar rescue asshole, the guy who goes in and like yells at people about why their bar sucks, and oftentimes the bar suck. But anyways. Taffer's like one guy, but honestly, he's just a sort of like a dumbass on the bottom of the totem pole there, right?
Yeah, of course.
Real guys, the guys who get it, like the capitalists at the very top, they'll tell you this, right? That they will accept temporary reductions in profits to avoid full employment. And it goes back to the coercion that you're talking about. But they don't want a situation where they have to compete for workers, because it puts them at a disadvantage, right? Typically, we're at a disadvantage because we all know what happens to us when we get fired. Things get desperate, they get uncertain, they're dangerous, we have no support system, right? As much as we do, it's extremely limited and it's rigged against us, right? Capitalists prefer that to be the dynamic. They don't like the other side of it, where they have to be nice to their employees, Make sure that none of their employees quit.
Dude.
Make sure that when their employees ask for a raise, they don't want to have a situation where employees ask for a raise. You have to give it to them, right? That's the dynamic that we're seeing right now. And there's a lot of weird economic factors that have created the conditions for it. But that's why there's this pushback.
Have you seen these articles? It's impacting us. Restaurant interviewees and new hires ghosting Bay Area employers.
How many times have you applied to a job and never got a response? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's amazing. And you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's a 1-for-1. The dynamic shifts and it's really, it's not beneficial for them. And again, like I opened up the segment being like, oh, this doesn't make sense, right? Why are they foregoing profits? Why are they creating a crisis like this when there's another option? It's because it is in their interest to, as absurd as it might sound, to accept lower profits, temporarily, as long as it doesn't create a kind of permanent or even just a long enough lasting dynamic where people can get wage gains, improve working conditions and things like that.
Exactly.
That's the kind of next level game that they're playing that I don't know. No. This is the kind of thing why it's worthwhile to read these things and understand how they think instead of thinking that everything is so simple.
That's the little thing where you hear like libertarians talk about the sanctity of contracts and how people wouldn't get into them if it wasn't rational for everybody. And it's like you start to make it a little bit even on those ledgers in terms of who needs to sign and who could walk away from that table. Then all of a sudden it becomes a little bit different. Like yeah, that's capitalism for you. But anyway, how much force are you willing to? I'm not going to make fun of Destiny. How much force are you willing to do to see your program implemented? Like, well, I don't know. I'm not going to like in the middle of a pandemic fuck 35 million people.
Exactly. It's pretty nasty. And look, again, Biden's doing it, but so was Trump. And the thing is, like, this is big bourgeoisie shit. Like, this is like beyond even these kind of characters, and you need to understand like the fundamental nature of the state instead of fixating so much on personalities.
Also this is why technocracy, like the Ezra Klein stuff, is all bullshit. Like this is all about force and power and coercion and control. These people inherited the heights that they sit in right now from the worst fucking like slave drivers and financiers of slave drivers, like and that's history. That's just history for you. Mm-hmm. I don't know when that stopped, because this is exactly it. What's happening right now is exactly what I would expect, given the inheritances these powerful people have.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think we'll have to save Bill Gates for the patrons.
We got to do Bill Gates in the post game. There's I have a fun Alex Jones sound drop. I don't know if you've seen it yet. I'll send it to you. Hopefully that doesn't get us into trouble. Plus, we'll be taking people's questions in the Discord and a couple more stories. So join us on the other side at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We really appreciate all of y'all. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm really feeling after this conversation that we might need to get a good guest on to talk about Fed policy to folks. I think actually demystifying these things could be really helpful for a lot of socialists and leftists.
Yeah, because I think just like we have the leftist case for all sorts of topics, there's a lot of interest in the Fed, and it isn't a friend of the left, for instance. And so
you also have to understand what it is too.
Yes.
Because like there's a lot of criticism about it that people think just because it's a criticism of the Federal Reserve means that it's progressive or good. And as you see with Bitcoin, that's not really the case either.
Or gold bugs, right? Exactly.
Yeah.